Good morning from County Durham on what is Easter Sunday for Christians around the world. I haven't recorded a poem in the last few days. I've had some quite busy evenings and catching up a bit on sleep. But I thought I would read a poem that is quite fitting for today. It's a poem called The Banner of Resurrection. And this poem was partly prompted actually not by initially the Christian resurrection, but a very good friend of mine, his father passed away. He was already ill with a form of cancer, but his death was still sudden. And this was in January of 2017. And around the time I'd heard about my friend's father passing away, I happened to be in the National Gallery in London, and whenever I'm in the UK, I tend to go to galleries if I can. And there are several, of course, medieval paintings there. At least one of which, depicts the resurrection. And in my ignorance, I hadn't realised that the banner of resurrection, the flag that Jesus holds, which is white and red, and I mistook initially for a St. George's flag, is not that at all, although it may have taken on that kind of iconography for later painters. So this is a poem in part about the resurrection, but also about coping with the reality of death and grief and the immediate sense of fatality. There's just one other thing I need to explain. This is one of the slightly longer poems in Exploring Rights, and it's written in a slightly more conversational tone. But there's one other thing, actually just two things I need to mention. One is there's a reference to the French painter Henri Rousseau. And if you go to the National Gallery, if I remember, it's in some of the rooms with paintings by Van Gogh and Cézanne. Rousseau was quite an unusual figure. He was a self-taught painter. The French referred to him as the douanier because he was a customs official, a lowly kind of customs official. He lived effectively in poverty, and he taught himself to paint, as I've mentioned, and he painted these very sort of fantastic, exotic scenes and of sort of jungle creatures, and they're painted in a very unusual way for the time. And Rousseau was taken in a little bit in a positive way, by some of the early modernist painters, Picasso and Delaunay and others, who even invited him to their kind of soirees. And maybe he was a slight figure of fun to those young painters. But possibly they also saw something unusual in Henri Rousseau. And I only came across his work actually initially through the poet Wallace Stevens. So Rousseau used to lie, frankly, about travels he'd been on and things he'd seen, and it was a form of fantasy, which is represented in those paintings, which caught the attention, as I say, of modernist painters, but also modernist poets in the early 20th century, including Marion Moore and Stevens and others. And then just finally, I'm not a theologian. I've forgotten quite a lot of the stories of the Bible, both the Old and New Testaments. But when Christ has resurrected, he is seen by Mary Magdalene, and she famously thinks he's a gardener. She doesn't know who he is, and he tells her not to touch him. So there's a complexity involved in the nature, I suppose, of Christ's corporality. Is he back as a human body, as well as someone who's going to ascend to heaven? So this is called the Banner of Resurrection. Imagine the gall of it, coming from anyone less. That first slippage of dust and sand, sifting as the stone broke free from its resting place. Moving at a calm breath's pace for the first time, since gravity and heft sealed what was meant to be only terminal. Imagine the audacity of denying that space, the precarious dignity of a tomb that first insinuation of light sieved from the hopeful dust, and the boulder scraping the rocky earth with a sound as grating and triumphant as a lion's roar from a desert where no feline paws or sniffs the dunes. Not even Henri Rousseau could have dreamt that. And, like Rousseau, we were never there. But these medieval portraits imagine they were, or someone was, an angel and a maid's centurion. At least they do not contest his incredible brush with death. The billowing white and red ensign, unfurled, is no St. George's flag, but the banner of resurrection, I'm told. And, in truth, if we wonder how he had this triumphant coil to hand, then we are, like them, half in love with and half in fear of death. Like patiently adopting the logic of someone else's craziness, that, however much one's brother thinks he is a chicken, however concerning that is, we decline all treatment because, as the old joke says, we need the eggs. If fear of death made those turbulent medieval hearts take comfort in an afterlife of the soul, always painted in the erotic expression of bodies naked and precise, the leap Christ required was that no one would ever mistake him for a soul. Not flesh reconstituted, but a body revivified, Frankenstein style. We accept, then, his appearance to Mary Magdalene, how she mistook him for a gardener. Harder to fathom are the group meetings and press briefings and the timing of the ascension itself. Couldn't he have taken a job as waiter, bided his time, gone undercover in humanity for a while? Then his self-propulsion to heaven, to the safe embrace at the right hand of his Father-Son self, might have matched the audacity of the boulder rolling. But for this he needed witnesses. I am forgetting the flag. How it troubled me that one who could perform such a feat might parade this conspicuous symbol of his gift. Like the master thief who can't resist initialing the blueprints of a perfect bank vault heist. Why couldn't the artist have expected a little less of the Prince of Light? He has boxed the eggs of Jesus' sleight of hand and labelled them eggs, so we know this is no ordinary reappearance, as if we needed telling. Or perhaps the elaborate banner is the return ticket none of us ever folds in our hands when we reach the final end of the gallery, with its sign read from the other side, exit only. A sign for those to come and a warning. It just seems completely unjust when I consider only this Monday how my friend's father, though mortally ill, collapsed so completely and faded from this life as living bodies clamoured to resuscitate. How unfair it is to feel no more than the fatality of fatality. How fatal that is. A fun-sized banner of resurrection for all ages, stored in a poster tube in the back of a closet in a dead man's house. Something never unfurled and never, ever ready to hand. Unless, by living defiantly, we may, like him, fly a flag in the face of death.